Have you ever felt invisible to your own family? Or been embarrassed by the very people you sacrificed everything for? Then stay with me. This story is going to hit you right in the heart. Before we begin, take a second to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and turn on your notifications because stories like this remind us why kindness, family, and truth still matter. Now listen closely because what my granddaughter said next changed everything. I never imagined that the worst humiliation of my life would come from my own son. I'm 68 years old, my knees ache when it rains, and my hands still smell faintly of soap and fabric softener no matter how many times I wash them. That smell comes from decades of laundry, his laundry. My son's, school uniforms, football jerseys, work shirts. I raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 9. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and told myself every sacrifice was worth it as long as my boy grew up strong and successful. And he did. Or at least, that's what everyone else thought. That afternoon, I stood in the middle of a restaurant filled with polished wood tables and soft piano music, feeling smaller than I ever had before. My hands trembled around my purse strap as my son's voice cut through the room, loud enough for strangers to turn and stare. "Mom, I told you already," he said sharply, not even lowering his tone. "This isn't the place for you. You're embarrassing me." The word embarrassing landed harder than any slap. I felt my face burn. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. People pretended not to listen, but their eyes gave them away. A couple at the next table paused mid-bite. A waitress slowed her steps. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. I just wanted to see you," I said quietly. "You said we could have lunch." He let out an annoyed sigh, rubbing his forehead like I was a problem he didn't have time to deal with. "Yeah, well, plans change. This is a business lunch. These people don't need to hear about your aches and pains or whatever." I didn't even know what to say to that. I hadn't mentioned my aches. I hadn't mentioned anything. I'd barely spoken since sitting down. Across the table sat his colleagues' men in tailored suits, women with perfect hair and polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. No one ever does when humiliation doesn't belong to them. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "I understand," I said, "even though I didn't. I can go." "That would be best," he replied, already turning back to his drink as if I'd stopped existing. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do with my hands, my purse, my dignity. Then I felt a small tug on my sleeve. "Grandma?" I looked down into the wide brown eyes of my granddaughter, Lily. She was 7 years old, wearing a yellow dress I'd bought her last spring because it matched the way she smiled, bright, warm, full of sunshine. She had crumbs on her cheek and a frown on her face, the kind she made when something didn't feel right in her little world. "Why are you leaving?" she asked, her voice clear and curious. My son stiffened. "Lily, eat your food," he snapped. "This is adult stuff." She didn't look away from me. "But Grandma just got here." I knelt slightly so I could meet her eyes, forcing a smile that hurt my face. "It's okay, sweetheart. Grandma just forgot something." Her eyebrows pulled together. "Forgot what?" I hesitated. I didn't want to poison her innocence with adult cruelty. "I forgot that your dad is busy," I said gently. She turned to him then. "Dad, you said Grandma raised you by herself." The air shifted. He laughed awkwardly. "What does that have to do with anything?" Lily tilted her head, the way children do when they're genuinely trying to understand something grown-ups make complicated. "If Grandma raised you, why are you being mean to her?" A few people at nearby tables stopped pretending not to listen. My son's jaw tightened. "Lily, enough." "But that's enough," he said more firmly. She looked back at me, confusion turning into something else, something sad. "Grandma, did I do something wrong?" "No, baby," I whispered, my throat burning. "You didn't do anything wrong." She stared at her father again, this time with a seriousness that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. "Then why are you making Grandma feel bad?" The silence stretched. Forks hovered midair. Even the piano music seemed quieter. My son cleared his throat. "Lily, you don't understand. Grandma should know better than to—" "Than to what?" she interrupted, her voice louder now. "Than to love you?" I felt tears well up despite my efforts to stay composed. He looked stunned, like he'd been slapped by words he couldn't defend himself against. "Who taught you to talk like that?" he asked sharply. She shrugged. "Grandma did. She says love means you don't make people feel small." That's when I saw something flicker across his face, not anger, not annoyance, fear. But I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. I straightened up slowly. "It's okay, Lily," I said. "Let's not argue." She grabbed my hand. "You don't have to go, Grandma." My son stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Yes, she does." "This conversation is over." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" "Because I said so." That old sentence. I remembered using it when he was little, exhausted and overwhelmed, never realizing how cold it could sound. I gently squeezed her hand, then let go. "Listen to your dad," I said softly. "I'll see you soon." I picked up my purse and turned away before my tears could fall. Every step toward the exit felt heavier than the last. I could feel eyes on my back, feel judgment and pity clinging to me like static. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. I stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, trying to steady myself. My hand shook as I unlocked my car. I sat behind the wheel without starting the engine, staring through the windshield as my reflection stared back at me, older, tired, and suddenly unsure of my place in my own family. I thought of the nights I'd stayed up sewing buttons back onto his shirts. The mornings I'd skip breakfast so he could have seconds. The time I sold my wedding ring to pay for his textbooks. I remembered him as a little boy, holding my hand too tightly when he was scared, calling me his hero. Somewhere along the way, I had become an embarrassment. I drove home slowly, every red light giving me too much time to think. I told myself not to cry. I failed. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from my son. "You didn't have to make a scene," it read. I stared at the screen for a long time before setting the phone face down. I didn't reply. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept busy cleaning, cooking meals I didn't have the appetite to eat, folding laundry that didn't need folding. Anything to avoid sitting still with my thoughts. Then, 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Lily stood there holding her backpack. My son stood behind her, arms crossed, looking irritated. "She wanted to stay the weekend," he said flatly. "Her mom's out of town and I've got work." My heart leapt, then sank. "Of course," I said. "She can always stay with me." Lily ran into my arms, hugging me tight. "I missed you, Grandma." "I missed you too," I whispered, breathing her in. My son cleared his throat. "Look," he said, not meeting my eyes. "About the other day. Let's just forget it, okay?" I nodded, because that's what I've always done. "Okay." But Lily pulled back and looked up at him. "Dad, you didn't say sorry." He frowned. "Sorry for what?" "For hurting Grandma's feelings." He scoffed lightly. "Adults don't need apologies from kids." "I'm not a kid," she said firmly. "I'm a person." I saw his mouth open, then close again. He looked at me, clearly expecting me to intervene. "I didn't. Just be ready by Sunday," he muttered, turning and walking away. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room, staring at an old photo on the wall. It was of my son at 8 years old, missing a front tooth, his arm wrapped around my waist, grinning like the world hadn't yet taught him how to be cruel. I wondered when I lost him. I didn't know then that Lily had been listening, that she was already forming thoughts far bigger than her age, that the words she would soon speak, simple, honest, and fearless, would freeze her father in a way no boardroom ever had. And I had no idea that the next time we all sat together, everything would finally come into the open. If you've ever felt like this, you're not alone. Family can be complicated, but healing is always possible. I woke up early the next morning to the sound of tiny feet padding down the hallway. Lily appeared in my doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair a wild halo around her head. "Grandma," she whispered as she climbed into bed beside me, "do grown-ups forget how to be nice?" The question hit me harder than anything my son had said at the restaurant. I gently brushed her hair back from her forehead. "Sometimes," I said softly, "sometimes grown-ups get so busy trying to prove things to the world that they forget what really matters." She thought about that for a moment. "I don't want to forget." "You won't," I said, hoping it was true. Over pancakes that morning, Lily chattered away like nothing was wrong. She told me about school, about a boy who tried to trade his apple slices for her cookie, and about a teacher who always smelled like flowers. I smiled and nodded, but my mind kept drifting back to the restaurant, to the sharp sting of my son's voice saying I embarrassed him. Later that afternoon, Lily sat at the kitchen table coloring while I folded laundry. She suddenly looked up at me. "Grandma," she asked, "were you sad when Dad was little?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetie?" She just shrugged, carefully choosing a blue crayon. "He looks sad a lot." but he acts mad instead. I stopped folding. It's amazing, isn't it? Children see things adults pretend don't exist. I was tired, I admitted. And sometimes I was scared, but I was happy too. Because I had him. She nodded slowly. Did you ever yell at him like he yelled at you? I hesitated. Honesty is important, but so is kindness. Sometimes, I said. I wasn't perfect. Did you ever make him cry in public? That one hurt. I hope not. She pressed the crayon harder against the paper. I think Dad forgot you were a person. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything at all. That evening, my son called to check in. His voice was brisk, all business. She behaving? He asked. She's wonderful, I replied. Good, he said. Just don't fill her head with nonsense. What nonsense would that be? You know, he said impatiently. That emotional stuff. I took a deep breath. She asked questions. He let out a sigh. Kids ask questions. You don't have to answer all of them. I think sometimes you do, I said quietly. There was a pause on the line. Look, he said, lowering his voice, I've got a lot on my plate right now. Big clients, big expectations. I don't need. Drama. As if my dignity were just a childish tantrum. I understand, I said, because that's what I've always done. But after we hung up, I sat there in the silence, and I realized something had shifted inside me. Understanding no longer felt like strength. It felt like surrender. Saturday passed peacefully. Lily and I baked cookies, spilling flour everywhere and laughing like it was the best mistake in the world. That night, she insisted on sleeping in my bed again. Grandma, she said in the dark, if someone is mean to you, you're allowed to be sad, right? Yes, I whispered. And you're allowed to say it hurt? Yes, you are. Then why didn't you tell Dad it hurt? I stared at the ceiling. Because I was afraid, I wanted to say, afraid of losing him, afraid of becoming invisible. Afraid that if I spoke up, he'd walk away just like his father did. I didn't know how, I said instead. She turned toward me in the darkness. I can help you. I managed a sad smile. You already have. Sunday morning came too quickly. I packed Lily's things, my chest feeling heavy. My son arrived right on time, phone pressed to his ear, suit jacket already on. 5 minutes, he said into the phone, holding up a finger as he stepped inside. Lily stood quietly by my side. When he finally finished the call, she spoke up. Dad, can I tell you something? He checked his watch. Make it quick. She took a deep breath. When you were mean to Grandma, it made me feel bad. He rolled his eyes slightly. We talked about this. No, she said, her voice small but firm. You talked. I listened. That got his attention. My granddaughter's voice was steady as she spoke to my son. Grandma didn't embarrass you. You embarrassed yourself. The air in the room went completely still. My son's head snapped towards her. Excuse me? He said, his voice sharp with disbelief. Lily didn't flinch. She came because she loves you, she said calmly. You acted like loving you was a problem. He let out a laugh, but it sounded hollow and forced. You're 7 years old, Lily. You don't understand adult situations. I understand feelings, she shot back. And Grandma's feelings matter. I watched as a storm of emotions crossed my son's face, first confusion, then irritation, and finally a deep, creeping discomfort. Let's go, he said abruptly, reaching for Lily's small backpack, but she stood her ground, unmoving. Did you know Grandma worked 2 jobs? She asked. His hand froze in midair. She told me, Lily continued, her voice gaining strength. She told me she skipped dinner sometimes so you could eat more. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had never told Lily those stories, not in so many words. But children, they listen, especially when you think they aren't paying attention. She sold her ring, Lily added softly. The pretty one with the blue stone? She sold it so you could go to college. My son was just staring at her now, the color draining from his face as if he'd seen a ghost. She cried in the car after we left the restaurant, Lily said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She tried to hide it, but I saw her. A small gasp escaped my lips. Lily, I started, but she cut me off, turning to me with a reassuring look. It's okay, Grandma. He should know. My son's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he looked completely lost. He finally turned his gaze to me, his voice quiet and shaky. Why did you let her think that? I took a deep breath and straightened my shoulders, feeling a long-buried strength return. Because it was true, I said, my voice clear. And because I was tired of pretending it didn't hurt. A heavy, uncomfortable silence filled the space between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. You never said anything. I didn't think I was allowed to, I replied honestly. Lily looked from his face to mine. You're allowed, she said, with a firmness that defied her age. My son collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I didn't mean to humiliate you, he muttered into his palms. I work so hard to be taken seriously in my world. I sat down beside him, my voice gentle. And do you think I don't? He looked up at me then, really looked at me. I could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, lines I hadn't noticed before. He was tired. I didn't think. He stammered. That's the problem, Lily interrupted quietly from across the room. You didn't think about Grandma. He swallowed hard, a visible effort. I see her, Lily continued, her eyes fixed on her father. She listens, she waits, she loves. Even when you're not nice to her. To my complete surprise, tears welled up in my son's eyes and spilled down his cheeks. I don't know how I became this person, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I placed a hand on his back. Neither did I admitted. But it's not too late to change. He nodded slowly, a wave of shame and regret washing over his features. I should apologize, he said, more to himself than to us. Lily, ever the little truth teller, crossed her arms. Yes, you should. A shaky laugh escaped him. You're terrifying, you know that? She just smiled. Grandma says the truth can be. He turned to me, Ben, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I am so sorry I made you feel small. I'm sorry I forgot everything you did for me. I felt a knot in my chest, one I hadn't even realized was there, finally began to loosen. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was relief. Thank you, I said softly. That's a start. He pulled Lily into a tight hug. You really froze me back there, he admitted to her. I didn't expect any of that. She hugged him back. I just told the truth. Later that afternoon, as I watched them walk away, my son glanced back. His expression was softer than I'd seen it in years. That night, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Dinner next week? Just us, no business. No phones. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning. Maybe this time he would finally see me again. But I had a feeling this was only the first step, and that my brave little granddaughter wasn't finished speaking her truth. After they left, the house was unnervingly quiet. I washed the same coffee mug twice, lost in thought. Lily's words, my son's reluctant apology. A fragile hope was taking root in my heart. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've spent years learning to live without it, but that night I let myself feel it. The whole week leading up to our dinner, I replayed conversations in my head. What would I say? What shouldn't I say? I didn't want another empty apology that faded with time. I wanted real change. I wanted respect. And deep down, I just wanted my son back, the little boy who once believed I could fix anything in the world. When the evening came, I chose a simple blue dress and the plastic bead necklace Lily had made me. I wanted to be myself, not the person I thought he needed me to be. He picked me up himself, no driver, no rushed phone calls. That alone felt like a small miracle. Hi, Mom, he said softly as I opened the door. Not, are you ready? Or let's go. Just, hi. Dinner was at a small, quiet place. Nothing fancy, no business suits. We talked about Lily, about work, about the weather. It was careful, polite, as if we were both tiptoeing around broken glass. Then, halfway through the meal, he put down his fork. I need to say something, he started. I held my breath. I spent my whole life running from being seen as weak, he admitted. I thought if people saw where I came from, saw how hard it was, they'd judge me, so I pushed you away. I made you smaller so I could feel bigger. The raw honesty caught me completely off guard. Tears stung my eyes, but I let him continue. I forgot that you survived things I never had to, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And instead of being proud, I was embarrassed. That's on me. I managed a slow nod. Embarrassment is heavy, I said softly. But shame is heavier when you carry it alone. He reached across the table, his hand hesitating for a moment before covering mine. I don't want Lily growing up thinking this is how you treat the people who love you. Neither do I agreed. He let out a long breath. I'm trying to unlearn things. I squeezed his hand. I know, just remember that unlearning still requires listening. When he dropped me off later, he hugged me longer than he had in years. Thank you, he whispered, for not giving up on me. I didn't say anything back. Love doesn't always need words. The weeks that followed brought small but real changes. He called more often. He started asking questions instead of making assumptions. His tone softened, even Lily noticed. You smile more now, Grandma, she told me one afternoon. So do you? I replied. Then came the school event. Lily's class was putting on a little presentation. My son invited me without a second thought. Sit with us, he said when I arrived. Us. That one word warmed my entire being. The auditorium was buzzing with parents and grandparents. When Lily walked onto the stage, she scanned the crowd until her eyes met mine, and she broke into a huge grin, waving frantically. During the show, one of her classmates froze, completely forgetting her lines. The room fell into an awkward silence. A few adults chuckled, but then Lily leaned into the microphone. It's okay, she said, her voice clear and confident. You can take your time, we're all here for you. The audience stilled. The teacher looked surprised. The little girl on stage smiled, took a breath, and continued. My son turned to me, his eyes glossy with tears. That's you, he whispered. That's how you raised me. I just forgot. I squeezed his hand tightly. We all forget sometimes. After the show, one of his colleagues came over. Your daughter is something special, he said. My son smiled, his chest puffed out with pride. She gets it from her grandmother. He didn't whisper it. He didn't say it with shame. He said it for everyone to hear. Later that night, Lily stayed over. As I tucked her into bed, she wrapped her little arms around my neck. Grandma, she whispered, Dad listens now. Yes, I said, stroking her hair. Because you spoke up. She smiled sleepily. I wasn't scared. I admitted softly I was. But I'm so glad you weren't. She yawned. Sometimes grown-ups need kids to remind them. As the house finally settled into silence, I sat alone in my chair again. But this time, the quiet felt different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I thought back to the restaurant, to the humiliation, the stares, the sharp words. I realized something then. That moment hadn't broken me. It had cracked something open. It had allowed truth to walk in through the smallest voice in the room. Weeks later, we went back to that same restaurant. My son insisted. Lily wore her yellow dress again. When the hostess asked for our name, my son said it clearly, confidently, with pride. And when we were seated, he pulled out my chair. Mom, he said, loud enough for others to hear, I'm glad you're here. I felt tears gather, but I didn't look away this time. Halfway through the meal, Lily leaned across the table and whispered, See? You don't look small at all. She was right. I never had been. That first time, we had walked into what felt like a minefield of judgment. I remember the hostess, her eyes flicking over us, a barely concealed impatience in her voice. Party of 3? She'd asked, but her tone said, Really? You? We were led to a tiny table wedged in a corner, as if to keep us out of sight. I felt myself shrink with every step. My kids, sensing my discomfort, became restless. Lily spilled her water, and the sound of the glass hitting the floor seemed to echo through a suddenly silent room. Eyes were on us, a mix of annoyance and pity. I wanted to disappear. I remember my son, only 8 years old, trying to clean it up with his napkin, his small hands trembling. A man at a nearby table muttered something about parents who can't control their children. His words were a physical blow. The shame was suffocating. I rushed the kids through their meal, paid the bill as fast as I could, and practically ran out of there, leaving a piece of my self-worth on the floor next to the shattered glass. For days, that feeling of being less than followed me. It clung to me like a shadow, whispering that I wasn't good enough, but I was failing as a mother, but I didn't belong in nice places. It was a familiar narrative, one that had been building for years, brick by painful brick. Every setback, every critical comment, every time I felt invisible, it all came rushing back, confirming the lie that I was small. I started avoiding people, making excuses not to go out. The world felt too big, too judgmental. Then, one evening, I was tucking Lily into bed. She was tracing patterns on her blanket when she looked up at me, her big, honest eyes searching mine. Mommy, why were you so sad at the restaurant? She asked. Before I could offer a sanitized, grown-up answer, my son spoke from the doorway. He was holding his favorite superhero figure. "It's because that man was mean," he said, his voice firm. "But he was wrong. You're the best mom." And then he walked over and handed me the superhero. "He's for you. So you remember you're strong." That was the crack, the light. In that small, quiet moment, their unwavering love dismantled the fortress of shame I had built around myself. Their belief in me was so pure, so absolute, it forced me to question my own self-perception. Was I really the small, insignificant person I saw in the mirror? Or was I the hero my children saw? I held that little plastic figure all night, its tiny cape a symbol of a strength I had forgotten I possessed. The truth wasn't in the sneers of strangers. It was in the hands of my children. They saw me, the real me, and they loved what they saw. It was time I started seeing it too. And that's how we ended up back at that restaurant. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving it to myself. It was about reclaiming a space where I had felt defeated. Walking in that second time felt completely different. I held my head high. I met the hostess's gaze with a calm smile. I wasn't afraid of the stares anymore because they had no power. My son pulling up my chair wasn't just a sweet gesture. It was a declaration. He was seating his mother, his hero. And when Lily told me I didn't look small, it was the final beautiful confirmation. The shame was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence that had been there all along, just waiting for me to listen to the right voices. I realized that my value isn't determined by the judgment of others, but by the love I give and receive, and most importantly, by the love I finally decided to give myself. I wasn't just taking up a seat at the table. I was claiming my rightful place in the world. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, perfectly, wonderfully big enough.